Earlier this week, like many of you, I saw the new Wuthering Heights film. I am a huge fan of the book. My dog is named after the author. I've read it 4 times. But did the movie do it justice? Was it even anything like the book at all? I'm Taryn Tyler. I'm an indie writer. I write gothic fairy tales, and on this channel, we talk about writing life, gothic literature, really anything bookish. And today, we're going to talk about the Wuthering Heights movie and whether or not I felt like it was a good adaptation. Like I said, I am a huge fan of the Wuthering Heights book. I love all the Bronte sisters, but Emily is my favorite. I even outlined a musical adaptation of the book, not once, but twice. Wanting to write a musical of Wuthering Heights is why I tried to major in music in college. So, needless to say, when I heard that there was going to be a movie, I was really excited. I've been loving that gothic everything is so popular right now. Like, finally, the things I like are mainstream. We've had a lot of really good gothic movies come out in the last year and a half. Nosferatu, Sinners, the Del Toro's Frankenstein movie. Like, we've had a lot of really good gothic stuff coming out. So I was thrilled. And then I saw the trailer. The trailer looked not very much like the book. It looked like it was going to be a cross between like Bridgerton, like costume piece, but make it steamy, with maybe a little bit of Notebook, where they have that like tumultuous romance. But it didn't have an interesting aesthetic, and so I wasn't ready to write it off yet. I was still like, okay, that's not what I would have expected. Obviously, I've thought about how I would do an adaptation more than once. So that's not my vision of the story, but maybe it'll be good. So I went to see it. But did it capture the spirit of the book, or did it not even come close? And is it worth seeing? If you're interested in knowing why I am so fascinated with the book Wuthering Heights, you can check out my Wuthering Heights Explained video, where I talk about the book and how it's been controversial since it was first published in 1847, and why I still find it so interesting. The movie was not a lot like the book. I'll say that up front. There were some things controversial, I know, controversial, but I did like some things about the movie. I liked the aesthetic. It was very Del Toro-esque. They had like a little bit of like an artsy thing going on with like just exaggerated set and costume design, which at first I was like, I'm not sure, like it's cool, but does it add to the story? Is there a point to that? And then I thought about it, and like the story is very much about heightened emotions, and like these people are running around doing unhinged things, right? So having that like heightened set design, heightened costumes, it kind of enhanced that. Like this is bigger than life. This isn't real life. This is a painting of life. This is, like you're looking in a mirror, like a fun mirror in a museum, or like funhouse mirror. There we go. It's not real life. It's exaggerated, warped real life. I do think the movie did a good job of showing how Kathy and Heathcliff's toxic relationship developed, starting with trauma bonding as children. So, if you're not familiar with the story, Kathy and Heathcliff grow up together and they have a hard life, and then they fall in love but don't end up together. And because they don't end up together, it results in a bunch of toxic behavior. And I think it really did capture the idea that they began as children And so they had a mischievous, playful rivalry type of relationship that then developed into an adult relationship with no boundaries, which is not good. But they were so familiar with each other that it kind of warped into this like dangerous form of intimacy where they just don't have any concept of boundaries, and they continue to aggravate each other in like this, oh, but it's playful type of way. But it's not. See if we can get some light in here. It's a really rainy day out, so not a lot of natural light going on. I did think the performance was pretty good. I think all the actors did a great job as far as what script they were given, and they played those parts very well. The best thing I think the movie did is they had a very good because of the heightened set design and everything. They really were able to drive in the contrast between the two houses. Right, we have the squalid, degraded, poor Wuthering Heights, and then the opulent, um, refined, and like over the top Thrushcross Grange. And so it really did play up the contrast between the two houses and the two different lives that Kathy was choosing between. So those are the things that I felt really captured the spirit of the book. But there were a lot of changes they made to the plot that kind of went in a completely different direction. And I'm not talking about just general changes to streamline the plot. Like they mixed Kathy's brother with her father as a character just to make for simplicity, right? And then there's a lot of stuff like that that really just needs to be done to make a book into a movie because a movie is simpler and more streamlined. But I'm talking about major shifts in the themes and general vibes of the story. The first thing that I really think made it a different story was they didn't really do anything with the Moors. In the book, the Moors, the wildness and feral nature of the wilderness, is such an integral part of the spirit of the story. And it's like really like this siren call that's calling them to leave behind what they know is good for them, to be like feral and wild with the wilderness. And the backdrop was very pretty, as far as like they had a lot of shots on the moor that were very pretty, and it was still like part of the background, but they didn't really use it. Like I'm talking about like scenes in Nosferatu, right, where Thomas is on his way to go to the castle, and there's like that long path, and it's just really misty, and you're just like, I mean, you know what's gonna happen, but you still like feel like you don't know, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's this creeping dread that's crawling all around me. Use the atmosphere, like let it seep into you. If I ever actually were able to have the musical in my head performed, like there would be fog machines in every scene. Like give me the mist, give me that slow, creepy atmosphere. Let it just steep in and make the story eerie and creepy and haunting. And so the next big change they made, and this is that they framed it as not so much this wild like ghost story, but a love story. Like it is a centered around these two people who are in love, but the story in the book is not told from their point of view. You are not ever supposed to relate to Kathy. No one can relate to Kathy. Like, sure, she has like this fierce wildness that's kind of attractive, but at the same time, like I don't think anyone would think that her decisions make sense. Like she doesn't think about other people besides herself at all, and I think that's really unrelatable to most people. And I don't think Emily Bronte ever intended for us to think of her as like the audience surrogate. In the movie, they even kind of drew some parallels to Romeo and Juliet, right? Like they have some scenes where they're talking about the story, but like in Romeo and Juliet, it's the outside. that keeps them from being able to love each other, right? Like they're these innocent kids who are in love, and there's so much hate in the world that it keeps them apart, and they die, and that's the tragedy. But in this story, like, there's a lot going on in the book, but they don't know how to communicate with each other, and they make decisions to be apart, and then it haunts them forever. So it's more of a story of regret than a story of like this un unstoppable passion that just kept them trying to be together no matter what. And the movie kind of ended with like these clips of how much they loved each other. It kind of just felt like the movie was contradicting itself because I mean it still had those same plot beats, right? Where they're choosing another person, uh, actively trying to hurt each other out of revenge, and all these like crazy X things that people, I mean, honestly in real life they do them, but it's not aspirational. And it just seemed like it shouldn't have been framed like that because they're ultimately selfish people who drive each other crazy. Even my partner who, hasn't read the book and he took me to see it, he said that like it does show in the movie that they are a match for each other because no one else could handle them. So they are a match for each other, but also they kind of can't stand each other either. Like they're driving each other crazy. So really they just both need therapy. Without those clips at the end and the framing of like having them talk about trying to draw the parallel of Romeo and Juliet, like it could be just like, oh yeah, I can see that this is toxic and that's not good. But it's like they're trying to frame it as something they're not, as if they didn't watch their own movie. Or the next big change they made that I kind of had a problem with is probably the worst one. And that's that I did not understand what they were trying to do with Nellie's characters. So Nellie is the servant and she's the narrator in the book. And she's really more of the audience surrogate, right? Like you see the story through her eyes, and she does not like Kathy at all. She says it in the book. She does not like her. And she's kind of just trying to make sense of all these crazy people that she works for, and she's really more of like a fly on the wall. But in the movie, they kind of made her sabotage Kathy on purpose, which I felt was a strange idea. And they gave us some justification by having Kathy say some really mean things to her, to be like, oh, this she's just really bitter, which would have been an interesting take of, like let's set up this thread of the privileged person not treating the unprivileged person very well and it coming back to bite her, except for two things. The first is they never closed the loop, right? They set it up like that's going to be a thread, and then they kind of just dropped it. Like Nellie does a couple of things more later to hurt Kathy, and it was kind of just like this is her motivation, but they never had Kathy realize that that was why, or really even acknowledge it in the the movie. They didn't have any kind of confrontation or reconciliation or even really discussion about it. Like they kind of almost villainized her and made it like this it's her fault that this happened to them rather than these people made their own mess. And that's not really true. Even if you watch the movie, you can still see that Kathy and Heathcliff are making their own mess. But it was almost like they tried to make it. They like were trying to give the audience someone else to blame, which I felt was a big problem for the other reason that I didn't like this choice. And that was that Nellie was the only character who was not played by a white actor. So in the book, Heathcliff is not white. And the discrimination he faces his whole life is part of what makes him really bitter and vengeful towards especially the second half of the novel, which was completely cut out of the movie, but we'll talk about that later. And so they pulled that element out of Heathcliff and put it into Nellie. I was surprised when I saw that Heathcliff or was cast as a white actor, But I thought, well, I could give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Maybe they're just trying to focus on the class difference and they don't want to have too many more stories out in the world where they're emphasizing racial trauma. Maybe that's what they were going for. But then they took those that being discriminated against and having it make them bitter element out of Heathcliff and put it into Nellie and kind of like made her a little bit of a villain in the story where it was her fault and not Heathcliff's fault and not Kathy's fault. It totally was Kathy's fault. And it wasn't a good choice. It just wasn't. I didn't like that. Yeah, I think that was probably the worst choice the filmmakers made. The last big change that I didn't like was, where's the ghost? Where, like, the book opens with a ghost. The book opens with Kathy's ghost, and they just didn't even have that in the story at all, which I didn't mind so much that they only did the first half of the novel, because I do understand that it is hard to put that into a movie because it's two separate stories. They're not. They're interrelated too much to be the separate stories, but they are two different arcs, right? So there's the first story with Cassie and Heathcliff, and then there's the second story with Heathcliff trying to get revenge on Kathy's daughter. And I understand that in a single film, that's a lot, unless the way I would do it, because I've thought about this before, is that I would open it with, I'm going to be self-indulgent here and tell you about how I would have done it. If you open with young Kathy's daughter, discovering the ghost of her mother in Wuthering Heights, and then you kind of have these two parallel stories where you have a framing device. So you would have one story that is this thriller haunted house story about Heathcliff trying to trap Kathy's daughter for her money. And, she's haunted by the ghost of her mother, trying to figure out what's going on. And then there's this parallel love triangle, except for she chooses the right guy at the end while she's learning about how her mother made the mistake of choosing the wrong guy because she chose him for the wrong reasons. And then at the end, while first you have the climax where Kathy dies and all that stuff, and Heathcliff is out in the graveyard trying to dig up her grave, and he sees her ghost for the first time. And then you flash back to young Kathy, and she chooses the right guy, and Heathcliff feels a sense of healing for that. And there's a plot point in the book where, like, he has a ward who he kind of sees as a son, right? Even though he purposely tortured him, but he identifies with him and he sees him as a son. And like there's a point where he gets hurt and Kathy sees, and that's how young Kathy finally decides to choose the right guy. And so I would put it where, like, at the end, Heathcliff, like, he feels that feeling of love and sacrifices himself, and he kind of is redeemed, but not really. And then Kathy and Heathcliff's ghost are eternally haunting the moors, but not the house anymore. But they can't be together, right? So they're continuing their, like, mixed up dance out on the moors, like, haunting but separately, and like they can never be together still. That's how I would do it. But yeah, the story of the ghost really drives home the whole theme of the novel, which is regret. It's regret and mistakes, and not, like, Heathcliff isn't able to let Kathy go even after she's dead. So not having the second half is maybe okay, but, like, give us the ghost. Give us the ghost. Show us why this is important. It's important because these decisions haunted them forever and did not only cause destruction in their own lives, but in all the lives of all the people around them. So I didn't love this new movie. Um, I didn't hate it either. I thought it was fine. I'll probably watch it again sometime. I'll pour a glass of wine and be in a certain mood. But my initial assessment from seeing the trailer, that it was going to be like Bridgerton meets The Notebook was pretty accurate. Maybe throw in a little bit of 50 Shades of Grey in there. It's like costume piece, dark, but make it sexy, was pretty much the premise of this adaptation, which is doesn't have all of the things that I love about Wuthering Heights in it. So, like, my partner asked me a really interesting question when we were discussing the movie afterwards, and he said, "Is there any part in the movie that you saw and you were like, ah, that was in the book. Someone read the book and that inspired them and they wanted to bring it to life?" And I couldn't think of one. Not a single one. Um, and it really felt more like they took a familiar story and they wanted to stuff it with all of the common tropes that are popular right now. Like, let's make it really sexy. We've got to have our heartthrob in there. Gothic stuff's in right now. Let's make it dark. Let's kind of capitalize on how popular Bridgerton is. But it didn't really have its own spirit, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if the film creators were really a fan of the book at all. I think they might have just been using something familiar as their framing device, which I'm going to say is not uncommon. A lot of movies and adaptations are like that. Some other ones in the Gothic space that come to mind are Phantom of the Opera or Bram Stoker's Dracula. Both of those completely changed the original story. They just used the same characters and the same setting and a lot of the same elements, but they mixed it up different. But it didn't work as well this time. And I'm really curious about why that is. Is it because society doesn't crave the same easy, more surface level tropes that it used to? Is it because we have the internet now and we can all scream our opinions all over the place? Or is it something innate about Wuthering Heights' story itself that just doesn't lend itself to that type of storytelling? Like, this book was controversial when it was written. People didn't know what to do with it. And maybe trying to wrap it up in this nice little bow and give it this more familiar type of packaging, like, right, people know what a love story is supposed to be, so there's less complexity. Maybe that's what didn't work, because it's it's a wild story and it can't be contained like that. You might as well be trying to trap some mist from the moor in a bottle and take it home. Maybe that metaphor is a bit much, but you know what I mean. But at the end of the day, I'm still glad they made the movie. I love that one of my hyperfixations is being talked about everywhere. It's like Christmas. Everywhere I look, everyone's like, Wuthering Heights. And I'm just like, oh, Wuthering Heights. I know what that is. So yeah, now that I've finished this video, I can go actually watch all of everyone else's hot takes and see what everyone else thinks. And we can continue to talk about Wuthering Heights for, I mean, you guys will probably all get bored in another week or so, but I could do another 3 or 4 videos on it. I have so many more thoughts. But if you haven't read Wuthering Heights, you should. Go read it. It's a really good book. I love it a lot. Bye. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing to Ink Spills if you enjoy fairy tales, gothic literature, poetry, book recommendations, or writing.